teacher.
Welcome to class. Who knows what I'm wearing? Do you recognize this from yesterday?
It's called a bonnet.
It is. It's a bonnet. And what time period is this hat from? Who remembers that? Can you tell me?
The 1800s.
And what was that period called? We talked about this type of life yesterday.
The pioneer life.
Yes, pioneer life. We were talking all about pioneer life. We watched that video about what their life looked like, and we made these journals. Who remembers our handy dandy pioneer journal? We dressed up like this, took some pictures. Touch your head if you made a journal yesterday. Wonderful. And so we talked a lot about what life was like during the pioneer period. And today we're going to talk about why life was that way. Were they choosing to live in palmetto leaf huts and traveling by wagon? Were they choosing that? No, that was a result of the time period. Certain things hadn't been invented yet. And so the pioneer period in Florida was the 1800s to the 1900s. And those are the events that we're going to talk about today. And we're going to use a timeline. I'm hoping that we're familiar with timelines. They're handy tools that help us organize a bunch of information in history in a short amount of time. And so we usually start on this end with the earliest date. So for our pioneer period, 1800. Can you say 1800?
1800.
1800. And then we're going to be ending over here in the 1900s. Can you say 1900?
1900.
Wonderful. And so a lot happened in that 100 years that impacted how they were living and how they began living as time went on. And so I have a short passage to read, and I need your help. Because as I read about some of the really interesting things that impacted life in Florida in the 1800s, I'm going to give you some cards. These are event cards. There's only a few kids in class today, so each of you are going to have 2 cards. I would like you to listen while I'm reading so that you can identify at what point in history did these events occur. And look at the timeline so you can help me fill in some of the missing pieces. And as I'm reading through the events, I'm going to use some images to call your attention to those specific points and events so that you know that they are significant. All of these events are important, but select events, Miss N feels, are important for you to remember for the rest of the lesson, okay? All right, so let's get started with our reading. If you have a question, please let me know by raising your hand. Otherwise, I'm going to get started. Yes, Marco?
Are you supposed to wear the hat the whole entire time?
I chose to take it off.
Okay.
It was just to get your attention. Did it get your attention?
Kind of.
Oh, good. Okay. So, Florida was the very first region in the continental U.S. that started to be explored by early settlers from Europe. And interesting enough, it took about 300 years before Florida became part of the Union, which means it became what is now known as the United States. And so that happened in 1445, and that's where we're going to begin, right here. In 1445, Florida joined the Union. And that was a very, very transformative point for life in Florida. So we're going to talk about life before that, and then life after that. So we're going to start in the very beginning of our timeline because we read timelines from left to right, earliest to latest. Yes, Logan?
I think you said 1445 instead of 1845.
Oh, thanks for correcting me. I meant 1845, right? So, in 1805, the very beginning of our timeline, the Native Americans were living happily in Florida. There were the Seminoles, the Apaches, the Tequestas, and the Calusas, and they're here just living their life. But settlers started to come to Florida. They were coming across the Atlantic Ocean, and they were also coming from the north. And they were trying to take over and claim what we live in now as Florida. And the conflict grew and grew and grew. And in 1817, the First Seminole War began. Boom.
Boom.
Soon to be President Jackson invaded Florida and attacked a bunch of Indians trying to target the Seminole Indians. But after quite some time, he wasn't successful. It was over a year, and he had not successfully captured the Indians, so he surrendered. There was no resolution with that war. He went on with his life, and the Indians went on with theirs, and the First Seminole War ended. And then 1818, Spain surrendered Florida to the United States, and they said, okay, this is now your territory. And then in 1821, Florida finally became U.S. territory. And then something very significant happened. President Jackson created something called the Indian Removal Act. He decided that he was going to create a law that gave him the authority to remove Native Americans from Florida. And the Native Americans were not happy about this, as you can imagine, right?
That was their home, and then they're pushing them away from somewhere that they were first.
Exactly, just because they decided they wanted that land. And so the Native Americans were like, nope, 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 nope. We're fighting back. And so then we ended up with our Second Seminole War.
So many wars.
So many wars, you're right. And the wild thing is, the Second Seminole War lasted 7 years. It lasted 7 long years. And sadly, no real resolution was achieved then either. There was no peace treaty signed, nothing. But we withdrew. And during that time, steamboats were invented. And so while the Seminoles and the Union are fighting their war, other people are doing really neat things, like developing steamboats, which made transportation much quicker.
So,
Yes?
well, I forgot the names of the people, like the people there before, and
The Seminoles?
yeah, and then the other people there, they were fighting for dumb reasons, and then for some other people, they decided to like actually do something better, and so they were creating things that made the world better.
You're right. You are correct. That's a great observation. And so now we're into 1845, and Florida's finally a state. They're part of the Union. And shortly after that, another Seminole War began. Does anyone have any guesses why there would be another Seminole War? Logan?
Because still the president what was his name?
Jackson, yeah.
Jackson was still trying to push the Seminoles out of Florida, and they felt like that wasn't fair, and so they fought back for another war.
Exactly. That is exactly it. And the interesting thing is, by the end of the Third Seminole War, there were just about 200 to 300 Native Americans left. 3,000 of them had successfully been relocated through the Indian Removal Act. But history says that for every 2 Native Americans that went to Oklahoma and were relocated, 1 Union soldier died. So 3,000 Native Americans were relocated. That means 1,500 Union soldiers died in this war. And this was the 3rd one. Isn't that wild when you think about those numbers? And still, they didn't get any resolution at the end of that war. In 1855, the U.S. just declared that they were done with the conflict. They were just going to be moving on. But the wild thing is, there was a new conflict that was about to start. Yes, Margot?
What is that thing?
What thing?
Like the flag.
This? Great question. This is the flag of Florida. That is the Florida flag. You know how there's an American flag? There's also a Florida flag. Back to this conflict. So the Third Seminole War was done. U.S. said, okay, we're not going to do that anymore. But just 4 years later, the Civil War began. The Civil War was a huge war that included more than just Florida.
Oh boy.
And it lasted a long time. It lasted 4 years. And Florida was involved in that war. And they fought on the Confederate side. And this is a whole other unit on its own. But what you need to know is that Florida fought in the Civil War. They fought on the Confederate side, and they actually served as suppliers for the Confederacy. They provided them fish and beef and oranges and kept them fed during the war. And then after that war ended, things settled down a little, and Florida went through a huge transition. They started developing as a state, and they started creating industries. In 1878, this is one of my favorite facts, a ship from Spain called Providencia crashed in Palm Beach, so right off the shore here, and they had 20,000 coconuts in their boat. And when they crashed, those 20,000 coconuts spilled out. And then people who were living in Florida had coconuts to grow and eat and harvest. Prior to that, coconuts were not in Florida. They were not native to Florida. Shortly after that, 1885, the barefoot mailman route began. Today we have a mailman that comes and puts mail in our mailbox every day. Back in the pioneer period, it was a huge deal for this man to just start doing this service. He didn't have a truck, he was barefoot, had a bunch of letters in his bag, and walked and walked and walked to deliver all of those letters. And then the last significant event I want to mention was in 1894. Florida was moving along. They were making great progress. They had started to develop crops and farming, and they have their railroad system now. They have their steamboats, and they're progressing. And then bam, the Great Freeze of Florida comes, and it ruins all of their crops for that year and years to come. And that is where we're gonna pause. That's the end of our timeline for today. And so that was a lot of information and a little bit of time. And so I wanna take a moment to kind of talk through some of the stuff we just talked about. And I'm wondering if any of these events were interesting to you. Would one of you share something that you found interesting or something new that you learned by completing this? Marco.
The coconut.
The coconut story. I love the coconut story, right? And I've lived in Florida my whole life. I thought Florida always had coconuts.
Wait.
But now we know they arrived when? In 1878. Can you say that?
1878.
Yes. And Logan, what did you find interesting?
I found it interesting that through all those wars that were happening, other people decided to use their like lifetime or their time in life to spend their time doing better things like creating the steamboat and the train.
I agree. That was fascinating also. Does anyone have any questions before we work on filling in the missing pieces to our timeline? If not, give me a thumbs up that you are ready to help me finish building. Great, I see lots of thumbs up. Okay, so the first box I see missing here, 1830. Something happened in 1830 that changed the way that the Seminoles were treated.
That's me.
That's you? What is it? Is our Seminole, what is it? It's our Indian Removal Act, right? It didn't specify Seminoles, it's just Indian Removal Act. So we're gonna put some tape on there. And then which box does that go in? What year did that happen? Perfect. And what year is that?
1838.
1830.
Close.
Perfect, give me 5. All right, and so we're moving along. We have our Indian Removal Act, our second Indian War. Trains get developed, we have our third Seminole War. And then something happened. This was another significant event event that is missing. Can anyone recall what happened from 61 to 65? Do you have an idea?
Florida fought the Civil War.
Florida fought in the Civil War, exactly. So do you think you could come fill that in for me? Here, you can put that to the back of
I
yours.
also got coconuts.
Oh, I think you know what's coming next.
Coconut.
All right. And so we're moving along. The Civil War ends, and then something really wild happened. What happened in 1778?
Coconuts.
What about the coconuts?
They all fall down from all the way to earth. Then so people can grow them. So they had coconuts to eat and stay alive. So they didn't die.
Where would that go on our timeline?
Right here.
Right. The only thing that I feel like you may have left out there was it was a ship, right? They didn't fall from Earth. A ship crashed. Can you have a seat? Oh, thank you. Find your way back to your seat. And we have one more important date to fill out. Something happened right at the end of our timeline that was kind of like a cliffhanger. Like, how did we recover after this happened? You have an idea? What was it?
The Great Freeze of Florida.
And what happened during the Great Freeze?
It made it tough for a lot of people because it ruined like all the crops and a lot of crops for a while after that.
Exactly. And so I appreciate you guys did a wonderful job. We filled in from 1800 to 1900. And if we look at this timeline, I'm wondering, how did transportation change from the beginning? And if we look back even further to yesterday, the boat that we were talking about yesterday, they truly just took a tree and carved the boat out of it. And so from that and the wagon that we were talking about yesterday, how has transportation changed? Do you have an idea?
The log boat changed from just being a hollow log to a whole like steam powered boat that had probably a lot more room. And then the wagon changed from a wagon pulled by horses that was probably pretty slow to like trains that were a lot faster, could hold a lot more people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well said. There was a lot of progression that happened through this time period. And the other thing that's interesting is there were 3 Seminole Wars. 3 Seminole Wars. Why in the world were there 3? Why wasn't there just 1? Tell me.
Because the President Jackson, he kept on trying to push the Seminoles out of his land, and the Seminoles thought that wasn't fair because that was their land, they were there first, and because President Jackson was trying to get them out of there, they said no, and so they fought back for like 3 different times of different wars.
Exactly, you're right. And the reality is there was never a resolution from those wars. They were fought, and not much progress was made. So I'm wondering, what was President Jackson's motive for creating this Indian Removal Act? Do you know, Marco?
To push them out.
Yes, exactly. He thought, well, if my war didn't work, I'm going to create a law. They have to listen to that. But did they?
No.
Nope.
They started wars.
Exactly.
To get their way because they thought that was not fair at all because they got there first.
Exactly.
But the king got there second, so they tried to destroy Jackson because it was unfair. They were there first.
Well said, well said. So you guys did a wonderful job. And so I have a really short video. It's like 3 minutes or less. And it's going to take you through this whole timeline because I think sometimes it's helpful to see this play out in the video so you can kind of get a visual idea of what it was like during that time period, what that felt like, and what has changed, right? Because right now we're in 2022. This was 200 years ago. So let's get right to your attention. I hope you enjoyed that video. So now we've read our passage about history in Florida from 1800 to 1900. We've built this awesome timeline and we've watched a fun video. I'm wondering how we feel. Do you feel confident that you can build your own timeline? I'll show you again what that's going to look like. It's going to be choosing 5 of these events, 5 significant events to transfer into your timeline. So I would like you to show me with your rating scale, a 3 if you feel confident that you can go ahead and build your own timeline, a 2 if you feel like you need Miss M to come review something with you, and a 1 if you feel a little lost and you really just need to review it a little more. All right, wonderful. So I'm going to pass out your Pioneer Journals now. This one is Marco's, this one is Logan's. And again, I want to give you a hint. When you're looking at our timeline for inspiration, there are images on the events that Miss M said it feels are important. So when you're trying to decide what 5 events to put into your timeline, take a look at the ones that have images next to them, because those are the ones Miss M really thinks are important. All right, so go ahead, get started. You'll have about 10 minutes to finish your own timeline. If you don't want to do a timeline, there's also a digital version that I can show you how to do where you can create a comic strip. And if you finish early, there is an extra research project where you will choose one of these events to research. But I can discuss all of those options with anybody who is interested. Just raise your hand and let me know. Please go ahead and get started on your timeline. Go ahead and close those up, pass those towards me. All right, thank you. And so to conclude our lesson, I'm wondering if anyone can show me, actually, if everyone can show me with their fingers, how many Seminole Wars were there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3. Thank you for showing me with your fingers. And what was the name of the law that President Jackson created targeting Native Americans?
For them to leave.
And it was called the Indian Removal Act. And yes, it required them to relocate. And Logan, do you recall what side of the Civil War did Florida fight on?
The Confederacy?
Bravo. And the last thing is, out of this whole timeline from 1800 to 1900, tomorrow, how many of these events are you going to remember? Show me with your fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4. I hope it's at